Hello and welcome to the 2021 UC webinar series. Today, we are delighted to be joined by Jess Cleeves from Core Counseling for some information on strategic self-care. As we head into fall and getting past summer, it's important that we remember how to take care of ourselves. This field can be really taxing on us sometimes, and Jess is here to provide some information, tips, and tricks on how we can take care of ourselves and be more present so that we can support the kids that we educate every day. I'm going to turn things over to Jess. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, Alex. That's a perfect introduction and precisely the point. I also am so grateful to UC for recognizing the relationship, especially for educators working in an environmental space. Often when we're talking to kiddos about things like mass extinctions and climate change, it can be a lot to manage in our own sort of personal stress sphere. I included this image. It's an image of a couple of little equisetum coming up, pushing up their horsetail selves and actually moving a chunk of earth and curving that little moss up. I think about this image a lot when I think about educators. It's no small lift, and there's a lot of accountability and little support. So it's an honor and a privilege to support UC's work and support the educators who are taking it into the world. So thanks so much for having me. Today, we'll be doing stuff. I'll speak at you for a moment in a direct instruction sort of a frame. I'll give you some background information for the first approximately third to half of our time together. We'll go over these key ideas. We'll talk about how stress impacts your students, even if you think you're hiding it. 5 to 8 of the common self-care components people in the self-care world talk about, the difference between caring and coping behaviors, and how the awareness of your own stress responses can support you doing your self-care planning. Then we'll build some tools. You'll leave with a self-care strategy map, and you'll build yourself a self-awareness grid with respect to your stress so that you can get better and better at your own self-care over time. This work comes from a lot of different places. It's informed by my background. I'm trained as a conservation biologist and then also taught for about 20 years. So clinical mental health is a second career for me. I spent years in the classroom teaching in Title I, Title III, and Title VI situations, doing real science with real kiddos and doing some coaching, and then finally some teacher development at the University of Utah's Center for Science and Mathematics Education, where I was Associate Director for Equitable Instruction and Clinical Support. I then left, which is why I'm doing this for all of you, right? Because for classroom teachers, the second I lost all street cred. So need to let you know that there is some backbone behind this stuff. While I was working at the Center for Science and Mathematics Education, I was also earning a second master's in critical social work. So critical social work looks at structural oppression and analyzes things from the perspective of the micro or the individual, the meso or the group or organization, which is usually the structure that we think of when we think of classrooms and schools. And then finally the macro, the bigger pieces, policy, et cetera, that we think about informing all of these. So while social work involves psychology, it also acknowledges that people are in an environment and that we're a part of a hierarchical species in which oppression is possible. So those are the lenses through which I'll be bringing you this work. And because I have had the great privilege of hanging out with educators for a while now, I know a couple of things about you. You registered for this class, which is extra, because you care about your work and you want to do well. You also know with great joy and great frustration sometimes that you're part of a system. So we'll be taking that person and environment approach to our work today. What I don't want you to take away is that your stress is your problem. I do want you to take away that there are structural causes for a lot of your stress, and I don't want to mistakenly place the blame on you. I just want to give you tools to survive as those who are able to do so labor to make the structure more and more survivable for you. So we're not victim blaming here. And then there are some assumptions that I'm going to be making about all participants because most of us are going to be human. We all have a brain. And because of my background in evolutionary biology, we will be talking about the brain from an evolutionary context. We share this lower part of our brain stem, with anything that has a notochord. So we can understand that brain part as the oldest, evolutionarily speaking. This middle part, this is where we keep our feelings. This is where we're really mindful of other people's facial expressions. This is where we are social. That's more recent. And then finally, up here, this is where college lives, deep time, calculus, etc. Okay, that's really important because that dictates priority. So when we're in a stressful situation, we prioritize where we keep our safety programs running. And then we're allowed to access emotion. And only if both of those systems feel like everything is in working order are we allowed to do any learning. So the important thing to note for us as educators is that because we're a hierarchical social species, any limbic system threat or emotional or social threat is perceived as an existence threat, right? A survival threat. And so we actually have similar physiological responses to these two things. The other critical thing to understand about a stress response is that it's involuntary and it's subjective. So what might stress someone out might not bother someone else at all. And this is all related to trauma-informed pedagogy work. If you have questions about that or anything as we go through, know that we'll have a moment at the end, and then my email will also appear on the last slide. I'm happy to continue talking about this stuff because I can't stop. Okay, so we get some kind of a jolt. We get some kind of a message that we are not safe, and an automatic process is off to the races. Our adrenal glands are only a part of this. We actually have a skeletal wide stress hormone called osteocalcin that's involved. Our stress responses are really quite complex. And that's because they need to get to all organs, all systems, almost instantaneously. So when we're having that stress response, all of these systems are impacted. It's not quite correct to say that they're all impacted in all of the same ways. It depends upon if we are in fight, flight, or freeze. Those responses look very different in us and in students. This is meaningful for learning because some stress is actually required for learning. So learning by definition is asking us to confront our current model of the world and correct it. That, in any context, is a little bit stressful. It's a perpetual adventure in not knowing quite the whole story. And so I also want to dispel the myth that we want that a trauma-informed classroom is a stress-free classroom. That's not true. It's a good stress or a eustress situation. Okay, so our goal is not to eliminate all stress, it's to keep stress functional. Once stress goes into a dysfunctional space, that's where learning stops. That's what we're trying to prevent, both in ourselves and for our students. So we want to avoid that fight or flight space. We especially want to avoid that freeze space. Fight or flight says my muscles, particularly my skeletal muscles, get more of my glucose and my oxygen, and my guts get less, my prefrontal goes offline, and I'm ready to either fight or flee. A freeze response says, I have lost. There's nothing I can do. Neither fighting nor fleeing will get me any safer. And so now I will prepare to die in the most comfortable way possible. And so in a freeze response, the opposite actually happens. So we actually become less sensitive in our hearing and our sight. Our heart rate will lower, and our blood will actually come back to the center of our bodies. Freeze responses are actually far more common than we think. Very often in students who are being accused of being lazy or disrespectful, particularly males in our current cultural context, tend to freeze a lot. Freeze is both initiated and supports the addition of shame. So all of this is important because as you learn about your stress response, you'll start to see it more in students, and it'll be this reciprocal evolving relationship. Okay, so a little activity. If you think that the answer is fight or flight, you'll just give me one of these. If you think that it is freeze, you'll go like this. If our heart rate is increasing, go ahead and take a guess. Indeed, we are going to fight or flight. If we have decreased hearing sensitivity. Yeah, that's a freeze response, right? We're trying to collect as little data as possible. That's an example, for example, sexual assault survivors might remember the color of the paint in the room, but not the words that an assailant was talking about. That's what's happening there, right? What if I have decreased facial expression or eye contact? Yeah, nice. Again, gosh, this looks a lot like teenagerness, right? And so teasing out the brain remodeling that happens during our teenage years with a stress response can also be really tough. We're really bad at doing it when we are under stress ourselves. So again, all of this comes back to how well you know your stress response and how well you manage it so that we can help students stay in that space of productive stress. Students know, right? Students know. 90% of our communication is nonverbal. This is an image from a study explaining to us why dogs were such a great fit for us as a hierarchical social species. They're really good at reading us. They're really good at reading facial expressions, micro expressions that happen instantaneously that we aren't deciding and then interpreting. Our students read this too. Okay, so we might think that we have everything under control right when we walk in the room, even though our personal lives are a mess. And they can hear the difference between, it's so good to see you today, and it's so good to see you today, right? They know. And so because we have the ability to respond to our stress level, it is actually something that is our responsibility. Often educators take on far more than they're actually responsible for, right? They feel accountable to what is the account at the end of the day. But what we really want to focus on is that which we actually can respond to. Okay, that is our circle of responsibility, which is an indigenous idea that says what the energy that we bring into a room matters and is our responsibility. So with that, I posit that self-care is indeed not a luxury, but it is our responsibility. And it doesn't always feel good. So let's go ahead and take away all that we've been taught from marketing campaigns for the last 50 years about how we deserve things like chocolate and fancy jewelry. This is not a token reward system. We're talking about deep, enduring self-care to truly lower our stress response. So the first activity I'll give, and if this is the only thing you take away, great. This comes from thousands of years of monastic practice, as well as modern science confirming through polyvagal theory. We actually have the power to control our cortisol levels, which is one of our main stress hormones, almost instantaneously. So what we're going to do is think about taking deep breaths so that our diaphragm expands enough that it touches a nerve that sits right on top of our stomach. This is a part of our ventral vagus system that actually carries a message up to our brain that says, don't worry, we are calm enough to decide to take a deep breath. So even if we are stressed out, it must not be that bad. It's a way to trick this part of the brain coming back online. Okay, so we'll practice. I do breathe with students. I breathe when I start class with all students, including adults and undergraduate and graduate classes. So I am not doing anything I wouldn't ask you to do or vice versa. So go ahead and feet flat on the floor, sit a little bit up. It's okay if your belly pokes out a little. Go ahead and blow out all your air. If you can keep up, great. If not, keep breathing. In for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Out. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. In. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Out. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. In. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Out. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Excellent. That actually took us less than 50 seconds. And as you start adding that to your practice, you'll notice an immediate lowering of your cortisol that you can actually feel over time. I encourage you to start practicing. We'll get to that when we make your plans. The more you practice it, the more immediate and dramatic your cortisol reduction will be. Okay. At this time, we've prepped your brains to be lower in cortisol. So we know the prefrontal is back on board. We also know that the ones learning are the ones generating language. So go ahead and grab a piece of paper if you haven't already. And on this piece of paper, we're actually going to use both sides. And I'd like you to make a big table filling up the entire thing. For those of you who like to be precise, the spacing of these is more for how I wrote them. It doesn't matter as much for how we're going to use the table. You just need one much bigger column and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 smaller columns. And once you have your table built, I want you to go ahead and start filling in that column, the stuff I like to do column. So this can be at any scale. This might be what you like to do when you come home from work, what you like to do on a weekend. What you like to do with friends, family. How you like to make new friends. And in the interest of time, those of you who are joining us, it's okay if your list is incomplete. Those of you who are watching the recording, feel free to pause until you've listed out. You'll keep this and you'll keep working with it. So as we do the activity, if you want to add some, you're always welcome to. Okay. And we'll talk about those columns that we're going to use in a moment. So the stuff that we like to do takes up our time makes up our life. The stuff we do is indeed who we are. In order to be balanced, self-care wise, often the literature talks about 8 categories. We're going to be leaving out 3 today. Okay, we're going to leave out occupational, financial, and environmental. Mostly because those are micro and are outside of the scope of the talk. They're really important for your own self-care. So again, we're leaving out occupational self-care or awareness and health as a part of self-care, financial, and environmental. Okay, those that we'll focus on, I have seen to be deeply meaningful for teachers and those over which we have the most direct control. So that's where we'll focus today. So the first of that is intellectual. A rich, full, meaningful life involves intellectual engagement. Most educators I know of, this is taken care of. Y'all are thinking all of the time. You're always seeking new resources, experiences, understanding. Teachers tend to be highly intellectually engaged folks. Often that's not a space that needs to be enriched much for teachers in their self-care. The second is physical. I intentionally chose this image of these 2 folks exercising together. Often when I say this, folks have a really strong emotional reaction and they say, oh, how can I'm supposed to train for a marathon now? I'm a teacher. Nope, you don't have to add a single thing. All physical self-care is acknowledging that you have a body and including it in how you think about building your day and your time. So it might be as small as the way you move while you are walking around interacting with students, or remembering to breathe between sessions, right? It's just that. If we're leveling up a little bit, I do want you, if your physical body allows, to be moving in such a way that your heart rate is up for at least 30 minutes for at least 3 times a week. That's the bare minimum to get rid of the cortisol that can only be processed through physical activity. Okay, I'm not needing everyone to become a super athlete. Next, we need social interaction for a part of a de-stressing life as a social species. Educators are overwhelmingly introverted, so this becomes very challenging, right? We spend our days with people, and so it feels like we have been social. Social interactions with young students are not reciprocal, okay? So we need to really intentionally curate our adult relationships in order to satiate all of the parts of our brain that we need to be active and engaged in order to regulate our stress response over time, okay? That's being said, it's okay to be an introvert. Care for yourself as an introvert, right? This means that if a social leveling up for you is one more dinner per week with your one good friend, excellent. I just want to make sure that you're attending to it, okay? It does not mean that you need to learn how to party. Okay, emotions, critically important for educators. Often educators are fielding other people's emotions. Emotional self-care is simply acknowledging and allowing yourself to feel emotions. Okay, so creating intentional spaces in your day and in your life where you name and process your emotions. As a scientist, I do not understand this. As a clinical mental health practitioner, I literally see it every day. It's, you know, indigenous epistemology and healing practices are lousy with this idea. It is that we have to process an emotion. If we have an emotion and we capture it, we shove it down, we don't allow it to be, it finds other ways to make itself known in our bodies. That does not help our stress response. Feeling, processing, releasing emotion is really, really important for humans. Finally, we need a spiritual element to our lives. This does not mean you need to be a member of a church or a faith community. If the word spiritual doesn't work for you, that's fine. Okay, it just means that we need to be connected to something more meaningful than just our solitary lives. We need to participate in something greater than ourselves. As an environmental educator, my sense is you already have worked on this a little bit. It's really helpful to be quite clear about how your work connects to your spiritual self-care, or you can consider it your sense of meaning self-care. Deeply essential, especially when we're in high stress moments. This can actually carry us through rather than add to our stress. Okay. Oh, let's go back one. No, let's save questions for the end for the sake of the recording. Thanks. Okay, next, critically important, the difference between caring and coping. Sometimes self-care doesn't actually feel very good in the moment. Sometimes self-care can be having a tough conversation, setting a challenging boundary, right? Cleaning out something, either metaphorical or physical. Okay, sometimes caring is not always fun. That's why we need to get rid of that marketing idea that it's just about indulgence. Okay, coping is often about indulgence. So if we're coping, that's a behavior that is stopping some negative feeling. It's stopping us from feeling anxiety. It's stopping us from feeling stress. Don't get me wrong. I love that we get to cope. Keep coping, cope, because the alternative is a real bummer, okay? The difference here is that I'm asking you just to name the difference between when you're intentionally coping, which is fine, and when you're intentionally caring, which is critical. Over time, what you'll notice is you'll be able to move more from coping to caring, okay? So I know I'm coping if I'm just trying to stop feeling a feeling. If I stop my coping behavior and my world is identical to the time when I started the coping behavior, I know it's coping. I know I'm engaging in self-care if, when I'm done, my world is different and better. So I may be a procrastinator. That's a really reliable coping strategy to protect me from culturally imposed ideas like perfectionism, fear of failure, or just total overwhelm, right? In the moment, it causes the feeling. It's really useful. We love it for that. And then we open up that computer, those emails are still coming in, our calendar still has deadlines, right? Our world isn't very different. Okay. A caring behavior over a deadline or avoiding might look like literally just saying out loud, I am feeling anxiety about this. I don't want to do it right now because it's so overwhelming. Awesome. Even just saying that is more healing than automatic and unaware procrastination, right? Then we can say to ourselves, okay, I still am overwhelmed. I don't want to do it, but at least I'm just going to open the file and I'm going to name it. And then tomorrow I'm going to write 1/4 of the words that I need to write before I get to go hiking. Okay, so caring allows us to start moving through any avoidant or unpleasant behaviors in a way that sets us up better over time. Okay, so what I'd like you to do is go ahead and grab that list you started making. And the first thing we're going to do is label the next column over coping or caring. Now, I will tell you this gets tricky because you may have labeled something in a broad category. For example, watching TV. Okay. So, oh, I forgot I was going to have you do all of them at once. Sorry. And then you're going to go ahead and add your self-care categories. So we have intellectual, social, physical, emotional, and spiritual. Again, synonym for spiritual, whatever moves you. And it's like this. You're just going to go through and do a little analysis. So I am a boater. I enjoy being on the water and I can't often. And so one of the ways I like to exercise is by using a rowing machine. So I might have just written watching TV, right, as a stuff I like to do. Well, if I can be more specific and say watching TV while rowing, that's very different than when I just watch TV, especially in this context, right? If I am watching TV while rowing, it's both a caring and a coping mechanism for me. It's caring because I do get to put a box in that physical category. I am exercising. It's coping because usually I'm watching trash. I'm not getting smarter. I'm not feeling feelings. It really is just me wanting to take a break from the activity in my brain. Okay. That versus a really high value activity. For me, if I'm hiking with friends, I know that that's caring because my world is different after I've engaged in that activity because it hits all of these boxes for me. I'm really extremely lucky to have really brilliant friends. I can't get out of a conversation without learning things, right? Interacting with those people enriches me socially. I'm out moving my body. Inevitably, we're talking about feelings, again, because of the kind of social connections I know I need to cultivate. And being outside and in non-human community is a part of my spiritual well-being. Okay. So those are a couple of examples. Go ahead and go through. If you need to parse out some of your categories, you're welcome to. If you need to make some subcategories of ways that you like to spend your time. Again, concurrent participants, thanks so much. You can go ahead and keep going if you'd like, or come back to it later. Those of you watching at home can pause and finish up, and we'll explain where we're going with this work. It's really important that you plan your self-care. So educators, go ahead and grab your calendars. And what I want you to do is look at how many activities got you those check boxes. And I want you to please, at least weekly, for the next month, add one high value self-care activity. So I want you to look at all that's being demanded of you, the fact that school is starting up, there are going to be extra meetings, you're going to need some extra time to build some extra stuff. All that's true. And you still have a responsibility to calendar at least one high value self-care activity per week. Then I'd like you to think about what your splurge day is going to be. And I'd like you to calendar one of those per month. Consider please doing that for the whole term. I want those on your calendar before anything else gets to get on your calendar. You can move them if you have to, but protecting the time, knowing that there might be a day where you're not working because you're going to be at a family reunion, or it's not available because that's your partner's birthday, right? Ideally, educators, you're getting to at least one day per week where you're committing not to work at all. But if we need to start at one day a month, we will. And then finally, our last activity. So go ahead and flip over your paper. And this is how you'll start to know when you need to be caring for yourself more or differently. Oops, I had intended to give you a blank table first. It's okay that that first row is filled in. You don't have to worry about it. So I'd like you just to go ahead and make this table 5 columns, 4 rows. And the reason you want to fill up a whole piece of paper is because you're going to keep this and keep adding to it. I'll title your columns stress, thoughts, behaviors, sensations and feelings, and skillful responses. And your remaining 3 rows will be low, medium, and high. So I'm just going to walk you through an example that I feel comfortable disclosing to give you a sense of how you'll use this. Ideally, this is a tool best kept somewhere where you can refer to it. I have a little spot in my phone where I track when I learn something new about myself. I also keep one in my journal by my nightstand. I have been known to have them scattered about in cars and bike repair bags and stuff. This is your business. Participants, we're definitely not going to ask you to share anything at this time. This is where it becomes really important to be quite honest with ourselves. Okay, so this is where I'm going to say things like, be honest about my behaviors. Like when I get too stressed, I raise my voice at my loved ones, or I drink too much, or I tend to sleep more than is probably healthy. Okay, this is where we get into that sort of deep self-care. So this is what it looks like. We're building self-awareness, again, to monitor how effective our self-care is. So I know about myself that when I'm low stress, my self-talk is generally positive. I'll open to a stack of new emails or a demanding response from a parent, and I'll greet it pleasantly and optimistically. In my own life, a behavior, if you were watching my movie, like my life like a movie on silent, You would know that I was low stress because I would be calling my parents weekly. I love my parents. Our relationship requires energy. And so if I'm calling weekly, I have the energy for that. In my own body, I experience a low stress as a lightness in my chest. It's easier for me to stand up straight. It's easier for me to feel open. And if I'm in this space, here's where it connects to self-care. I need to calendar the verb while I'm feeling this way. So while I'm here, this is when I have the capacity to look ahead and really intentionally build my time. Okay. This is when I can do things like love and logics, put money in the bank of my relationships. This is when I can do extra thoughtful things for friends. This is when I can schedule dental visits and getting my oil changed, right? So if I recognize I'm in this space, I can be more proactive in that way. If I do that well, it can actually prevent me from getting to the medium stress space, okay? My medium stress space sounds like this. And again, this is just one line. As you learn more about yourself, you'll fill in gaps, okay? So when I'm feeling medium stress, my internal self-talk sounds slightly negative. I'll be greeted with a new task and I'll have a sort of ugh response, right? I know that I'm here if I was watching like a movie on silent, because for no reason at all, I will wait a day, 2 days, 3 days to return texts that didn't need to be waited on, right? I can have a response right now. I just don't seem to have the energy. My food cravings are really indicative for me. I can eat all of the ice cream when I'm in this medium stress space. And when I'm here, I know that even if my prefrontal is offline, even if I'm in a space of decision fatigue, I can still choose those high value, low input self-care options that we talked about in the previous table. Okay. And then finally, if I'm in a high stress state, I know because I would not speak to a 3-year-old the way I start speaking to myself, right? I'll start swearing at the world, or start swearing at myself. I'll say really mean things to myself. I will hermit. I'll go for more than 3 days of just talking to nobody. I'll know I'm here because my heart is racing as I go to sleep. Okay, that's a really clear indicator for me that I'm not managing my cortisol levels sufficiently. Sometimes when I'm in this space, the only thing I can do is just say no to additional commitments, knowing that it'll be temporary, knowing that I just need to stick with the stuff I've already calendared and acknowledge that it will pass, as long as I do say no to those additional things and keep that other self-care going. Okay. The idea is that by being this aware, we can actually eliminate this time. Often when people think about self-care, we have to get all the way to this high stress level before we start acting. And we actually want to think about stress regulation as a constant commitment, a constant activity. Anything I can do at any point and any day to lower my stress response is self-care. I don't need to save it for the weekend. Okay. Okay. So our final thing that I want you to calendar is, oh, remember, we're just going to keep this somewhere. So as you learn, as you observe, as you're becoming more expert in yourself and your stress response, you're going to add stuff. It's going to help you modify how you think about building your self-care plan and how you think about engaging in the activities that are meaningful to you and your stress reduction. Okay. The final thing I'd like you to calendar for today, you don't necessarily need to put this on your calendar, but I do want you to think about it. If taking 3 breaths immediately lowers our cortisol, that is a quick and dirty way to get to that lowest stress row. I want you to, this is from the habit change literature. This is called habit chaining. I want you to think about something that happens for you every day. It might be brushing your teeth. It might be always getting stuck at that one long stoplight. Okay, and I want you to tie taking your 3 breaths to that pre-existing habit. When we do that, it's easier for us to be habitually effective. Okay, when are you going to take your 3 breaths? For practitioners, This is a really great thing to do to tidy your instruction, right? It's really great to build that into that extra challenging class or that one activity that you're really nervous about facilitating. And if we can think about our self-care being as micro or as individual or tiny as daily breathing, to thinking about planning our whole year, over time, we'll experience less stress. We'll put ourselves in less stressful situations, and we'll take less stress out on our students, supporting more effective and more fun and longer careers in your essential work. Any questions? Okay, well, thank you so much for your time and attention. It's been an absolute honor. I am pained in my heart that we take as poor of our educators as we do, and in my own practice, I'm striving to make policy level changes to change that. And in the interim, I'm so glad that you are empowered and self-actualizing and capable of caring for yourselves in rich and meaningful ways. If you want to learn more about my work, please come find me at corecounseling.org. I'm happy to chat with districts, individuals, and teams for both individual and group clinical support and professional learning. Thanks so much, UC for the chance, and Alex for your visionary support of educators in so many different spaces, and particularly in environmental education spaces. I'm honored to be a part of your community. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jess. I really appreciate your time. And I think this is really timely too, because especially over the past few months, we've been talking so much about supporting the social and emotional learning needs of our students. And I think we also really need to be focusing on the needs of everyone who's an educator too, so that we're really creating, I think, the kind of teaching environments and communities we want to see in our world. So thank you so much. Thanks for everyone who's joined us today, and for folks who are tuning in. You can visit our website, uc.org, for more information about upcoming events. And please visit Jess's website at corecounseling.org if you liked what she had to say today. Thank you so much and have a great day.